So welcome to this month's Millennial Spotlight, brought to you by Lead with Intention. I'm Leslie Bosterman, Executive Coach and Lifestyle Strategist, partnering with millennial leaders and their managers. The purpose of these conversations with millennial changemakers is to deepen and extend the dialogue around how to lead with intention. This month, we're focusing on the intention of mindfulness and how practicing it can enhance your life and your leadership impact. Today, I'm here with Michael Fong. He's an avid yogi and mindfulness instructor who teaches and trains all around the world. And he talks about how to stay grounded, how to stay present. I'm just so excited to have Michael with us today. So he's going to share more about specific mindfulness techniques and how it relates to millennials and the many benefits that they have. So welcome, Michael. It's so good to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Leslie.
So tell us a little bit more about your background and your focus and how you came into this field of study, field of practice, I should say.
Well, when I was young, I was training in martial arts for, over a decade until I started to teach martial arts. And that was, I think, my foundation and what I aspired to do. And then eventually transitioned from martial arts into more of the corporate realm. And I worked for a large corporation for a while. And throughout all that time, I just had an emphasis on moving my body, finding ways to breathe and to cope with stress. And it was always something that I was aware of and I had a passion around. And so eventually I found yoga, and yoga was just the most perfect fit for me because it had elements of meditation, breathing practices, very dynamic movement, which was just a huge calling for me. So eventually I transitioned out of working in the corporate realm and then went into yoga full time. And it's been my life ever since. And I'm so grateful for this practice.
And after taking, I don't even know how many of your classes, probably hundreds at this point, you have such a gift of teaching, but also your practice. I see you practicing in other classes, so you're a student and a teacher at the same time, which is a beautiful balance.
You know, in our teacher trainings that my partner and I run, we always have it in every single session, this student teacher mantra, which is a beautiful mantra in Sanskrit. And what I gather from that mantra every time I chant it is that, the student and teacher is a label that can be very interchangeable. Because the qualities of being a student are necessary in a teacher, and the qualities of being a teacher are necessary in a student. So I just feel that there's so much that's connected between teacher and student that really it's just one thing.
And I could see the parallels for many millennials even in the workplace. So maybe not on yoga mat, but in their jobs where they are learning, but they're also teaching skills, especially technology and communication skills. So there's this bi-directional mentorship almost that happens. But we'll dive deeper into some mindfulness things and how that dovetails. So tell us a little bit more about how you define mindfulness.
Mindfulness is a really interesting term. It can cross so many different barriers, and it's just kind of, I think, a landmark term that is really popular now and that I hear a lot about. And there's certain qualities that I think that really stick out to me when it comes to mindfulness. I think one of the first ones is just being aware. And from that awareness stems certain actions. And I think that between awareness and taking action is a practice of mindfulness. And within that scope, there's also, I think, the time that's happening when you're practicing mindfulness is the present moment. So the big practice of presence is another huge quality. But yeah, I think mindfulness is something that is very unique because it's a lot of people think it's just like sitting down and meditating, which is a huge practice, and it's a huge practice of mine. But I think that mindfulness can be practiced anywhere, whether it's, sitting behind a desk and behind a computer, having a conversation with someone, practicing on a yoga mat. It can be happening at any time. And that's one of the things I love about it, is because you can take it with you anywhere.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I think about one of the big barriers I know I've experienced and have overcome to some degree, but constantly we're battling it with the frantic pace of life, the urgency we feel, the multitasking, but especially this practice of, or habit, I should say, of in a conversation, someone sharing something with you, and instead of choosing to be mindful and attentive, we're thinking of what we're doing next, or what we want to say next, or where we'd rather be, and we're not actually giving that person that time and that respect. So I think there are a lot of ways we can hijack mindfulness. I don't know if you have any examples that you've experienced or you've seen people do over time.
Yeah, even though yoga may seem separate from mindfulness, there's a lot of mindfulness practices within yoga. And one of the things that comes up for me when you talk about this is the concept of vritti, which is these fluctuations of our mind. And when I think about the mind kind of ebbing and flowing, and it can sometimes feel a bit polarized. Like there's times where exactly, having a conversation and then feeling your body tense up, because you can already in your mind, you want to be able to have something prepared to say next, and you're just ready to let it loose, like you're about to pull a trigger on a gun. It can start to bring up a lot of intense feelings. And then of course there's instead of being really prepared, there's the other side where you're kind of checking out and thinking about what you're going to have for dinner, and what you got to get for your kids, and am I going to exercise tonight, and all these different things that can be taking you away from the present moment. And these fluctuations of the mind can be sometimes really difficult to deal with, and there aren't a lot of systems out there to address this in a way that's tangible for people. That's something that it can be structured in a way that people can just call upon and use it and put it in their toolbox.
Yeah, and as you're saying this, I think about just being able to calm down that monkey mind, calm down all the little thoughts that are going kind of ping-ponging back and forth. And I know breath work is one that we teach in yoga, but also it's very accessible for anyone. I know with clients, I often just say, hey, take a deep breath, take a couple deep breaths. And even with young kids, it's amazing how much it calms their body down. So tell us a little bit about your experience with breath work and any specific practices that you've used.
So in yoga, they call it pranayama, and breaking down that term, prana is the idea is our life force energy. Some people know it as chi, but it could just be labeled as energy. And yama is considered to be a discipline or restraint. And so placing a disciplined practice of using the breath to kind of circulate our vital energy in a way that's useful for us. The breath practice is one of the most unique things for me, because it's one of the very few things that can really call a person's attention to the present moment. You tell someone when they're having this frantic, chaotic moment, where they're like, oh my gosh, this happened yesterday, and this is what I got to do tomorrow, and what am I going to do? And so they're getting caught in this time warp of past and future, and then all of a sudden you say, hey, take a breath. And they're back into what's happening in reality. And I think breath is really a call to reality. It's a moment for you to actually remember, oh my gosh, I have a body, and I have a body that I can feel, and that I can feel grounded in. And so Yeah, like I talk to people all the time, like for instance, if they're in like a intense business meeting, like, and they're sitting in a chair, like ground into your seat, like lengthen your spine, draw your shoulders back and down, soften your jaw, and all these movements, just like in a yoga class. I mainly teach vinyasa yoga, which is breath linked with movement, and the breath really leading the movement. So like every time, like even if you're just sitting in a chair, like you can make these little tiny micro movements to get your body in a position where you can breathe in a really enhanced way. And when you get that type of energy moving through you, that tends to ripple effect out into everyone that's around you. So it's not just it's like benefiting you, calming you down, making you feel grounded, making you healthier, but there's just a certain presence that comes about when a person is really focusing on their breathing. And in addition to that, getting back to what we were talking about, how, oh my gosh, like I got to think about what I'm going to say next to have something, prepared and intelligent to communicate to the next person. Lately I've been really trying to focus on my breath when I'm having a conversation with someone, just because I'm tired of feeling locked and loaded and trying to control my response, and more just trust in my breath and trust that my response is going to be exactly what it needs to be if I can just focus on my breathing. And so the breath can be utilized at any time.
Yeah, and physically, the more oxygen you have flowing through your body, the more power your brain has, your heart has, your blood has. It's all connected on a very physical level. So I know there are times like when I've worked out really hard and I'm not breathing well, I get tired. Or one of my instructors once told me, if you're ever really tired, make sure your inhales are twice as long as your exhales to get more oxygen in your body. And those are the times when, in order to do that, you have to be very focused. You have to be very mindful that your body is actually capable of all of this. And thank your body for it. Be really appreciative of it. And that's something that I find, it almost sounds corny to just thank your body for being healthy and alive, but it fuels your life. And we typically, especially in our Western society, as young people, we think we're somewhat invincible, that we can really go and go and go until we can't. And we're not in the habit of taking sick days or even vacations, and kind of that culture of really taking care of ourselves. We have to embrace that more. And I don't know, I've seen millennials go either way, Michael. I've seen them burn out really fast, or I've seen them have a lot more freedom and flexibility and be very mindful. So tell me about your experience with this unique generation regarding mindfulness.
I think that it's just a very exciting time. Obviously, like, when I turn on the news or read the paper or things of this nature, like I see a lot of negativity, and there are a lot of issues. But I'm very curious, and I'm very interested to see what this younger generation is bringing to the table. Just as like people in their younger 20s. I had this one gentleman. He's 24 years old. He just got done with one of our teacher trainings, and he is brilliant. And I'm seeing at the capacity that a lot of these younger people can operate from everything that they're dealing with technology, everything that they're doing with, the information that they have, and applying it to, everywhere else within their work, within their personal life. And I think a common quality that comes from that is just a certain level of brilliance. And at the same time, one of the fallbacks is that just getting so overwhelmed that you start to lose that mindfulness. You start to lose that presence. And I think it's very important that whether it's a younger generation, an older generation, just across the board, getting back to the breath. Like one of my favorite teachers said this once. He's just like, how you're breathing is how you're living. And so the quality of your breath has a huge influence on the quality of your life. And So yeah, I even have to catch myself a lot of times where it's just like, I'm on my email, I'm designing my website, I'm on Facebook and social media, and I can come away from that and thinking like, wow, like I feel so overwhelmed that throughout that whole time, like my breath was pretty static, and they didn't have a fluid quality to it. So getting back to this idea of the millennial generation, I'd say like one of the biggest words that would sum it up for me is like, I feel very hopeful, because this is a very informed generation. And I think the next thing, coming from that sense of awareness and information, the next step is action. And so that's the curious part that I have about it, is like, what kind of like actions are going to be taken that's going to help shape this culture within this time.
And with that, a lot of millennials are managed by people who are 10, 20 years older than them. And I know you work with a lot of corporate teams. They call you the corporate yogi, which I love. So when you're working with individuals who are in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, who are managing millennials, who have this amazing possibility to kind of capture that hopefulness, capture that drive, with regard to mindfulness, so mindful management, possibly, what would you recommend, or what would you share with these managers?
Well, I think to a certain extent, the old school way of doing things, which is like give a lot of structure, to really manage a lot of the different pieces of what their work is, like that's necessary. I know it can be sometimes like micromanagement, awful thing, but like I believe that in the initial phases of whatever type of business this may be, like there has to be structure, there has to be foundation and stability. I always think of it like a yoga pose. Like you don't just go into the depths of the stretch and open up and ask your body to just do these really challenging things without first setting up a strong foundation. And so having good structure is the initial. But then eventually there are certain phases in which you have to start to back off and allow for some organic energy, for some organic growth. And that means that you have to ease off of control. And I'd say that would probably be one of the most difficult, and I would go as far to say one of the scariest things, is letting off the reins and allowing things to just take over. And I think that's one of the things that yoga has taught me, is that to really become aware of the things that you can change, and also to understand the things that you can't change. And for the things that you can't change, trusting in the fact that you've developed the structure to give these millennials, a firm foundation, something that they can feel confident and stable and secure in. And when you give people that, then I feel like it's just a matter of opening it up and just reminding them of their potential. I was just having a conversation with my partner, Tristina, and just saying, like, the approach that we want to take when teaching our students is, not to focus in on what they're doing wrong, or saying like, constantly like, you need to improve this, you need to improve that. Like just saying like, we see this in you, like giving them an honest look and seeing and finding their greatness, because everyone has it. And so if you can actually see that potential and address that with them, after establishing like that firm foundation, people will rise to the occasion. And and so yeah, it's very powerful experience. So I think that if people that are in the older generation kind of managing this new group of people, give them some structure and let them know what they're capable of. And then for the rest, allow the space for growth.
Yeah, I once heard that structure actually creates freedom, because when you have expectations, when you have boundaries, when you know what's possible and what's expected, you have the basically the playing field. You can go for it. It's not how you do it, it's what needs to get done. So you have the target. And it's so empowering to hear you talk about the structure that you can provide, but also the acknowledgement, that really honest look of, this is who I see you to be. This is who you are. And what you do with that is really your legacy. What you do with that is your gift to the world. So I definitely encourage managers to, echoing what Michael said, just really take that empowering stance. Be mindful enough of your own strengths, of your own gifts, in order to know what the gifts of others are. And I mean, that in itself is one of the most powerful things you can do on any team, in my opinion.
And you've taken yoga classes, Leslie, and you practice a lot. And one of the things that you experience within a class is how a class is sequenced. And a yoga class, if done well, is sequenced in such a way that you've prepped the body so it can be stable and firm to go into deeper postures eventually towards the latter part of class. And I think that sometimes when people manage others, they tend to not sequence in a way that's intelligent. Maybe they'll give too much freedom in the beginning and then start to crack down, and try to impose a lot of, micromanagement later on. And so the way that you approach managing people or your business, like there's an intelligent way to sequence, just like there's an intelligent way to sequence a yoga class for people to flourish in their own way.
Yeah, that's a beautiful metaphor. I think that when you can get out of it, like so many managers are in this place of, I don't know what to do. These people just want praise all the time, or I can't accommodate them. And they turn to these almost broad stereotypes of the worst side of millennials, or a few millennials, instead of saying, what's possible? What can I do? And I think mindfulness is such a key foundational principle for anything, but especially when you're dealing with managing others, whether they're the same generation or cross generations. But because we know millennials thrive in environments where they can create their own vision with structure, with expectation, and they thrive on acknowledgement. All of these things are qualities that you've already highlighted that I think are beautiful. So are there any other specific mindfulness practices, maybe one of your favorites, that you can model for us or you can share with us so we can kind of take that home and put it in our toolbox?
Well, the three main things that I work on and that I'm the biggest student of and what I teach are movement, breath, and stillness. We address the breath. Movement for me has always come so naturally, and it's been one of the things that has kept me sane throughout a lot of my life. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of people, whether they're doing spin classes or playing basketball or doing a yoga practice on the mat, what's known as the asanas or the postures. It's all physical movement, and we need to move. It's necessary, and it's one of the best ways to access our mind. Because really, when you think about mindfulness, you think about meditation, you think about sitting very still and just doing absolutely nothing for what can feel like a very long period of time. And that may not feel accessible for most people initially. So movement is usually a great gateway to direct yourself towards more of a meditation practice, which is the stillness practice. This may be going off topic a little bit, but I do see this younger generation being very active, and they want to do as many different things as possible. I see people going from run to spin to yoga, and just one thing after the other. And that can also be a byproduct of how things are now moving with, the information, where you have 8 different tabs open on your computer, and you're working on your website, working on, social media, working on your emails. So trying to get in as much in as possible. And so while movement is great, eventually where this is going towards is more of a focused stillness. And And so trying to get all this jam packed in, thinking that you're doing all these things, like you may have to re-examine those types of things and be conscious of, like, how much am I putting on my plate, and how much can I really be present for all of this so I can receive the most benefit. And usually that requires scaling back. But so getting back to your question, like other practices, so movement is a really huge one for me. As I was speaking to you recently, I recently suffered an injury, some type of nerve damage in my spine, and it was from practicing jujitsu. Mm. And this has been a very humbling experience, because I've only been dealing with this for the past month and a half now, and I've had to really shut down a lot of my movement. And it's, I haven't had an injury quite like this for a long time, and it's been very humbling. But I gotta say that I'm just so incredibly grateful that I have other tools in my toolbox to help me through this process. Because with mindfulness, it may just be staying focused on something positive. And when a person's in chronic pain, or just at least a pain that's very consistent and present, that can consume a lot of attention, and therefore consume a lot of energy. So because I can't move, I'm feeling sluggish and tired and lethargic, and then that can lead to depression. I can already start to sense that depression kind of looms around the corner if I don't keep my mind in a good space. And so using pranayama, using breath, like any time that the pain starts to become so overwhelming, that I have something to focus on, which is my breathing. Now, meditation, or the practice of stillness, is also huge too, because I shouldn't say it forces, it allows me the opportunity to sit with all of my vritti and fluctuations of my mind, with all the pain that I'm experiencing in my body, and sit there long enough. And if you sit there long enough, and if it's practiced with enough consistency, you'll start to understand that everything is impermanent. Mm. That eventually the mind does calm, and the pain does dissolve. And it's one of the greatest experiences that I've been able to have, and it's one of the biggest reasons why I want to share things like a mindfulness practice or a yoga practice, because it is a really great way to cope. It's a really great way to experience the world, and so I would even add in one more thing to movement, breath, and stillness. And this is another reason why I feel really drawn to doing yoga is a sense of community, having other people around. And I gotta say that I would not be able to continue on another day if I didn't have the people around me that I do.
Oh, that's absolutely true. Just knowing that it's not just showing up for a class, it's showing up to a space. It's showing up to a different home, in a sense.
And a space where, like you walk into a yoga class, Leslie, and like you may not even have a conversation with the people around you, but like you're moving together, breathing together, and at the very end you go into shavasana. You're lying down, taking like this little little nap time with a bunch of strangers in a room full of people. Like, talk about a sense of vulnerability, that you can feel safe enough that you can close your eyes lying down in a room full of people. Usually like back in the day, I had to shut my door and close my blinds and under my covers and make sure I'm tucked away in order for myself to sleep. And now I can doze off sometimes in shavasana and in a room full of people. I just find that to be hilarious. I find that to be fascinating, and I also find that to be very special.
It absolutely is. It just shows another level of allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to grow. And I think it sounds like a great idea until you have to be in that space, in that really vulnerable, kind of tender space. But I know, especially practicing yoga, and it's more than just yoga, it's a lifestyle that is built from that, where you're able to have the strength to be tender, the strength to be vulnerable. It's kind of a both and. It's not, oh, I'm strong and I can't be vulnerable, I'm vulnerable, I can't have strength. It's because you are strong, you're able to be vulnerable. Because you are mindful, you're able to be grounded. I mean, there's so many beautiful dualities that come into play when we're practicing in this way. So thank you for sharing that part of your story. That's really, really beautiful and very, very vulnerable. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, thanks for letting me share.
And I encourage everyone who's listening, as you continue to explore your own mindfulness practice, as you get more present, as you use your breath, I really encourage you to check out Michael's work. There's a link to it on our blog. And you can go to leadwithintention.com for more insight and other perspectives from millennial changemakers. We do a Millennial Changemaker Spotlight every month, so if you know somebody you'd like to feature, there's a nomination form you can fill out, or if you want to nominate yourself, go for it. And I just thank you again for being with us today. This is Leslie Bosserman inviting you to join the wholehearted leadership revolution as you continue to lead with intention.